She had always believed that life didn't owe anyone anything. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, packed her son's lunch, and left for work, with a quiet sigh that no one ever heard. She had learned to smile through her exhaustion, to hide the worry that followed her like a shadow. Being a single mother wasn't easy, but she had stopped waiting for easy things a long time ago. Her little house sat at the edge of a small town, where the road turned into a dirt path that led into miles of woods. Most people found the woods gloomy, but she found peace there. On nights when her son was asleep, she would sit on the porch and listen to the wind moving through the trees. It made her feel less alone somehow. She worked as a cleaner during the day, moving from house to house, scrubbing floors and washing windows for people who hardly looked her in the eye. Then, when evening came, she went to the diner on the main street, tying her apron around her waist and serving plates of food to tired travelers. By the time she got home, her legs hurt and her eyes burned, but she always stopped for a few minutes at her son's door just to watch him sleep. That moment made everything worth it. One Friday night after her shift at the diner, she finally clocked out around midnight. The roads were almost empty, and the only light came from her car's headlights. She drove slowly through the back road that cut through the woods, thinking about the bills waiting for her at home. Her car heater wasn't working, and the cold air pressed against the windows. She rubbed her hands together and tried to ignore how tired she felt. Halfway through the road, the engine made a rough sound, and then went quiet. The car slowed to a stop. She tried turning the key again, but it only clicked. "Not tonight," she whispered to herself, hitting the steering wheel softly. She opened the door and stepped out, the cold night air wrapping around her. She looked around. The woods were silent except for the faint rustling of branches. Her phone showed one bar of signal. She tried calling a local mechanic, but the call didn't go through. With a sigh, she wrapped her coat tighter and leaned against the car, deciding to wait for a bit. That was when she heard it. It was faint at first, like a muffled cry, almost impossible to notice over the wind. She frowned and looked around. "Hello?" she called out softly. No answer. The sound came again, this time a little louder. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like a person, weak and desperate. Her heart started to beat faster. She grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and took a few steps toward the trees. "Is someone there?" she asked again. The sound came from deeper in the woods, hidden behind a curtain of tall trees and thick undergrowth. Her mind screamed that it was too dangerous, that she should wait until morning or find help. But something stronger pulled her forward, the thought that someone might be in real trouble. She couldn't walk away from that. The cold ground crunched under her shoes as she moved carefully through the woods. The light from her phone trembled in her shaking hand. The sound came again, a choked, broken noise. "I'm coming," she shouted, her voice trembling. She reached a small clearing where the ground looked uneven. Her flashlight moved across the dirt, and that's when she saw it, a patch of freshly disturbed soil. The shape was strange, uneven, almost like the ground had been dug up recently and filled back again. The sound was coming from there. She froze. For a few seconds she couldn't breathe. Then, without thinking, she dropped to her knees and started digging with her hands. The dirt was cold and rough, scraping against her skin, but she didn't stop. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she clawed through the soil. After what felt like forever, her hand touched something solid. Cloth. She gasped and dug faster until she saw a hand, pale and motionless. She pulled harder, her breath coming fast, until she uncovered a man's face covered with dirt. His eyes were half open and there was duct tape over his mouth. Her heart nearly stopped. She tore the tape off gently and the man gasped for air, his chest rising and falling sharply. "Oh my God," she whispered, brushing dirt from his face. "You're alive. You're okay. Just breathe." He blinked weakly, his lips dry and trembling. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't call police," he murmured, his eyes darting around in panic. She frowned, too shocked to speak for a moment. "You need a hospital. Someone buried you." "Please," he whispered again, clutching her wrist weakly. "They'll find us." She didn't know who they were, but his fear felt real. She looked around, half expecting to see someone in the dark. There was nothing but silence. She pulled the man up, supporting his weight as best as she could. He was trembling, barely able to stand. "Come on," she said softly. "We have to get you out of here." Step by step, she helped him through the trees until they reached her car. The engine was still dead, but she remembered there was a small cabin not far from the road, a place she used to pass while walking home once when her car broke down before. It was empty most of the time, used by forest rangers occasionally. "I'll take you somewhere safe," she told him, wrapping her coat around his shoulders. He nodded faintly, his eyes closing from exhaustion. She half carried, half guided him down the narrow path toward the cabin. It took almost 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. When they reached it, she forced the old door open and helped him lie down on a wooden bench inside. He was cold to the touch, his skin pale and rough from dirt. She ran back outside to grab some sticks and lit a small fire in the old fireplace. The glow slowly filled the room, chasing away the darkness. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't talk," she said gently. "Save your strength." She found a bottle of water in her bag and handed it to him. He drank slowly, his hands shaking. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He looked at her, eyes clouded with confusion and fear. "Kidnapped," he muttered. "Took everything. Left me there." "Who?" He shook his head weakly. "People I trusted." Her chest tightened. She didn't know what kind of man he was or why someone would bury him alive, but the terror in his eyes told her it was real. He started coughing, and she helped him sit up. "You'll be fine," she said quietly, even though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "We'll figure this out." Before he fell asleep, he grabbed her hand and whispered something she couldn't quite understand, just fragments of words. Promise. Truth. Not over. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his eyes closed and soon he was asleep. For a long time she sat there watching the fire flicker against the walls. The woods outside were silent again, as if nothing had happened. But inside that cabin something had changed. She didn't know who the man was, but a strange feeling filled her chest, a mix of fear, pity, and something deeper. She had seen people in pain before, but this was different. Whoever he was, someone had wanted him gone. As the fire burned low, she pulled her coat tighter and looked at him again. There was dirt under his nails, scratches on his arms, and a deep mark on his neck as if someone had tied him up. But beneath all that, there was something calm about him now, as if being found had given him a second chance. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. She turned her phone over in her hands, thinking about calling for help, but his words echoed in her mind. "They'll find us." Maybe he was paranoid. Maybe he was right. She sighed and leaned back against the wall, exhaustion catching up to her. Her son would wake up in a few hours, wondering where she was. She needed to go home soon, but she couldn't just leave him here alone. Her eyes grew heavy as she watched the flames dance in the fireplace. The man stirred slightly in his sleep, whispering something she couldn't hear. When she finally closed her eyes, she didn't know that this night, the night she followed a sound in the dark, was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. She didn't know who he was, or what kind of danger was coming their way. She only knew one thing for sure. If she hadn't stopped her car that night, if she hadn't listened to that faint cry in the woods, someone would have died alone under the cold earth, and somewhere deep inside she felt it. This wasn't just a rescue. It was something bigger, something she couldn't name yet. When she opened her eyes, the dim morning light was already slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. The smell of burnt wood filled the air, and then she saw him, lying on the bench, his chest rising and falling softly. The man she had found buried alive. She sat up slowly, her back stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. Her phone battery was almost dead, showing only 2%. She glanced at the man again, wondering what kind of life he must have lived before ending up like this. His face looked calmer now, though there was still pain written across it. She quietly got up and stepped outside. The woods were still, covered with a thin layer of mist. She pulled her jacket tighter and tried to collect her thoughts. Should she go home to her son first? Should she call for help? What if someone was still watching the place where she found him? Her heart said she couldn't just leave him. Not like this. When she returned inside, the man was awake. His eyes followed her carefully, alert but not fearful anymore. "Good morning," she said softly. "You're safe here." He blinked, then tried to sit up, groaning in pain. She hurried over to help him. "Don't push yourself," she said. "You were half buried in the ground last night. You need to rest." He nodded slowly. His voice was low and rough. "Where am I?" In a small cabin, she said. Not far from the road. I found you in the woods when my car broke down. He looked down, silent for a long time. Finally, he whispered, You saved my life. She shrugged, trying to smile. Anyone would have done the same. But she knew deep down that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have walked into a dark forest at midnight. Most people would have ignored the sound and kept driving. He stared at the flickering fire for a moment, then asked, Why didn't you call the police? She hesitated. You told me not to. His eyes met hers. There was something heavy in that look, something that told her he carried secrets she couldn't yet imagine. Was someone trying to kill you? She asked quietly. He rubbed his wrist where faint rope marks showed. Yes, the single word sent a chill through her. Do they know you're alive? He shook his head slowly. Not yet, but they will if we're not careful. She didn't know what to say. It all sounded like something from a story. A man buried alive, whispering about danger and betrayal. Yet sitting there in front of her, he looked too real, too broken for this to be anything but the truth. Do you have a family? She asked softly. He hesitated, then said, Not anymore. Something in his tone made her stop asking. She could see the weight behind his silence. She offered him a small piece of bread from her bag and a bottle of water. He ate slowly, as if every bite took effort. I need to get back to my son, she said after a moment. He's probably worried. He looked at her confused. You have a child? Yes, he's 10, she smiled faintly. He's my whole world. The man nodded, almost as if he understood that feeling. Go to him. Don't let me put you in danger, she frowned. You're in no condition to be alone. I'll come back after I make sure he's okay. You'll be safe here for a while. Before she left, he caught her hand weakly. If anyone asks, You never saw me. She looked into his tired eyes and nodded. I understand. The walk back through the woods was longer in daylight. The sunlight filtered through the trees, but every rustle made her nervous. She kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting someone to appear. When she finally reached the road, her car still sat there, silent and dead. She managed to get a signal long enough to call a local tow truck and then caught a ride back to town. At home, her son ran into her arms. Where were you, Mom? You didn't come home last night. She hugged him tightly. I'm okay, sweetheart. The car broke down and I had to stay somewhere safe. He pouted but quickly smiled when she promised pancakes for breakfast. Watching him laugh, she felt a brief moment of peace. But the image of that man lying in the dirt wouldn't leave her mind. After dropping her son at school, she went to the diner. She tried to focus on her shift, but every clatter of dishes, every slam of a door made her flinch. Around noon, she couldn't take it anymore. She told her manager she wasn't feeling well and left early. She packed some food, water, and a small first aid kit, then drove back toward the woods in a borrowed car. Her heart raced the whole way. What if he was gone? What if someone had found him? When she reached the cabin, she found him sitting near the fire, awake and alert. He looked cleaner now, though still weak. You came back, he said quietly. I told you I would. He gave her a tired smile. You shouldn't have. She ignored that and handed him the food. You need to eat properly. He took it gratefully, and they sat in silence for a while. Finally, she said, You never told me your name. He hesitated, then said, It's better if you don't know for now. That answer made her uneasy, but she didn't press further. She could tell he was still trying to trust her. Then at least tell me what happened, she said gently. I found you half buried in the woods. Someone must have wanted to hide you there. He leaned back, staring into the fire. I was driving home from a meeting when someone ran me off the road. I woke up tied up in some basement. They asked for codes, passwords, things I refused to give. I thought they'd let me go, but... He paused, swallowing hard. They didn't. They took everything valuable, then drove me into the woods. I heard them talking about leaving no trace. I remember the shovel. Her breath caught. You mean they buried you alive? He nodded slightly, his eyes distant. They thought I was already dead. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She could hear only the fire crackling and the wind outside. Why would anyone do that to you? She asked finally. He gave a faint, sad smile. Money changes people. So does greed. She understood that kind of pain in a different way. She had seen how cruel people could be when life tested them. Do you think they'll come back? She asked quietly. They'll look for me once they realize the job wasn't finished, he said. That's why I can't stay here forever. I need to find a way to disappear until I know who's behind it. She bit her lip. You need help. You can't do this alone. He looked at her kindly. You've already helped me more than anyone ever has. You should forget you ever met me. But she couldn't. Something about him, his calm voice, the sadness in his eyes, stayed with her. She changed the bandage on his arm and gave him a warm blanket. I'll check on you tomorrow, she said. He looked up suddenly. Why are you doing this? She smiled faintly. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. He stared at her for a long moment before saying softly, You're not like most people. She laughed quietly. That's what everyone tells me. That night back home, she couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her sit up. Her mind replayed his words again and again. They'll find us. Who were they? And why did he trust her, a stranger, to keep his secret? In the morning, she took her son to school again and headed back to the cabin. As she walked up the path, she noticed something strange. Footprints near the door that didn't belong to her. Her stomach tightened. She pushed the door open slowly. The man was standing near the window, holding a small stick like it was a weapon. When he saw her, his shoulders relaxed. Someone was here, he said quietly. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I heard them outside at dawn. Maybe more than one. They didn't come in, but they were looking. Her pulse raced. Do you think they know you're alive? Maybe, he said, his voice calm but tense. But we have to assume they do now. She took a deep breath. Then we need to move you somewhere safer. He nodded slowly. Do you trust me? I don't know, she admitted honestly. But I want to. He smiled faintly. That's enough. They left the cabin before noon, walking through the woods together. She helped him as he leaned on her shoulder, still weak but determined. They didn't speak much. The silence between them said more than words could. When they finally reached her car, he paused and looked back at the trees. You saved me twice, he said quietly. Once from the ground and once from giving up. She didn't understand what he meant then. But she would soon, as they drove away. Neither of them knew that what waited ahead wasn't safety. It was the beginning of something far more complicated than either of them could have imagined. The ride back to town was quiet. The man sat beside her, staring out the window as the trees slipped by. He looked stronger than before, though the tiredness in his eyes hadn't faded. She kept glancing at him, wondering if she had done the right thing. Bringing him with her was risky, but leaving him in the woods after what he'd been through didn't feel right either. When they reached her house, she parked behind a row of bushes so no one would notice another car outside. Her son wasn't home yet, and that gave her a little time to think. You can rest here for a while, she said, unlocking the door. It's small, but it's safe. He hesitated for a moment before following her inside. The house was simple. Faded curtains, second-hand furniture, and the faint smell of coffee in the air. She guided him to the couch and handed him a blanket. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded. I'll make you something warm. While she cooked a bowl of soup, she kept thinking about the danger she might be inviting into her home. She didn't even know his name or the full truth about what had happened. But when she looked at him, she didn't see a threat. She saw someone lost, broken, and trying to hold himself together. When she placed the bowl in front of him, he looked up at her and said softly, You don't have to do all this. I can leave once I figure out what to do next. She sat down across from him. You can't go anywhere until you're fully better. Besides, whoever did this to you might still be out there. He sighed and nodded. I know, but I don't want to bring trouble to your door. She gave a small smile. Trouble doesn't usually knock first. It just shows up. We'll deal with it if it comes. For the first time, he smiled too, a tired, grateful smile that made her chest ache. Later that evening, her son came home. The man stayed in the small room at the back of the house while she tried to act normal. Her boy chatted about school, about how he had drawn a picture of a forest and how his teacher said it looked like something from a storybook. She smiled and listened, though her mind was somewhere else. When her son went to bed, she carried a tray with tea to the man's room. He was sitting on the floor by the window, looking out at the dark street. Are you sure no one followed you? She asked quietly. He shook his head. No one knows I'm here. You're safe. She set the tray down. That's good. But I still think you should tell me who you really are. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. If I tell you, you might regret helping me. I'll decide that, she said softly. He took a deep breath. My name is not what matters. What matters is that the people who buried me weren't strangers. They were business partners and people I trusted for years. I run a few companies, some investments. Recently, I discovered they were using the business to hide illegal money. When I confronted them, everything changed. She listened carefully, trying to take it all in. So they tried to silence you? Yes, he said. They wanted control of everything. I thought I could handle it quietly, but I underestimated how far they'd go. She looked down at her hands. And now they think you're dead. He nodded slowly. Which gives me a small advantage. But if they realize I'm alive... He didn't need to finish the sentence. She understood. They sat in silence for a while. Then he looked at her and said, I'm sorry you got pulled into this. She shook her head. You didn't pull me in. I walked into it myself. And maybe I was meant to. He looked at her with a strange softness in his eyes, as if those words meant something more than she realized. The next few days passed quietly. She went to work during the day, pretending everything was normal, while he stayed hidden at home. He helped around the house a little, fixing a loose door hinge, cleaning the old kettle, even mending a broken chair leg. Her son noticed small things. How someone must have fixed the kitchen light, how the squeaky floorboard no longer made noise. Did you do that, Mom? He asked one evening. She smiled faintly. Maybe the house decided to be kind for once. At night, after her son was asleep, she and the man would talk. He told her about his childhood, how he grew up in a busy city and worked his way up from nothing. He spoke about how success had filled his days but emptied his heart. She told him about her life, how she had raised her son alone, how she worked until her hands ached, how sometimes she wanted to give up but couldn't because someone depended on her. He listened with quiet respect. Sometimes when she talked, he looked at her like she was reminding him of something he'd forgotten, something simple and real. One night, as they sat at the kitchen table, he said, When I was buried that night, I thought it was over. But when I heard your voice, I realized I still wanted to live. That's strange, isn't it? She shook her head. No, it just means you had something left to find. He smiled faintly. Maybe I did. For a while, things almost felt normal. But that peace didn't last. One evening, when she came home from work, she noticed a car parked across the street. A black sedan with tinted windows. It was the same car she had seen near the diner earlier that week. Her stomach dropped. Inside the house, she found the man pacing near the window, tense. They're here, he said quietly. Her heart skipped a beat. Are you sure? He nodded. I recognized one of them. He used to work for the people who betrayed me. They must have tracked something, maybe the cabin, maybe my phone before I threw it away. She looked toward her son's room, her throat tight with fear. What do we do now? He turned to her, calm despite the tension in his voice. We stay quiet tonight. Don't turn on any lights. If they realize I'm alive, they won't stop. They sat in the dark for hours, listening to every sound outside. The car didn't move, but she could feel eyes watching from across the street. Her son slept peacefully, unaware of the danger around them. She sat on the floor beside the man, whispering, I should have never brought you here. He shook his head. If you hadn't, I'd be dead. You did the right thing. She looked at him, her voice trembling. What happens now? He took a deep breath. Now we find a way to make this right. But I can't do it alone. Her heart pounded. What do you need me to do? He hesitated, then said, help me prove what they did. If I can show the evidence to the authorities anonymously, they'll go down. But I need access to my old files now and I can't go there myself. She swallowed hard. You want me to go there for you? I wouldn't ask if it weren't important, he said gently. You're the only person I trust. She stared at him for a moment, unsure how she had gone from working double shifts to planning something that could expose dangerous people. But she could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't trying to use her. He was trying to end something that had almost killed him. Tell me what I need to do, she said finally. The next morning, while her son was at school, she drove to a building on the edge of town, one of his old offices. He had told her about a safe hidden behind a panel under his desk. Inside would be documents, photos, and a hard drive. She parked quietly and walked inside, pretending to deliver a letter. Her hands shook the whole time. She found the office empty and did exactly what he said. Behind the wooden panel was a small steel box. Her heart raced as she pulled it out, tucked it in her bag, and left as calmly as she could. Back home, she handed it to him. He opened it and exhaled in relief. "You did it. What now?" she asked. He looked at her with gratitude. "Now we send this to the right people. But once this is done, things will change." "And what do you mean?" He met her eyes. "When this is over, I'll have to disappear again. For good this time." She felt her chest tighten. "After everything, you're just going to vanish?" He gave a sad smile. "It's the only way to keep you and your son safe." She didn't reply. The truth hurt more than she expected. That night, as they sat together one last time, he whispered, "You didn't just save me from death. You reminded me what being alive feels like." She looked at him quietly, not knowing what to say. Outside, the night was calm again, but she knew deep down that calm never lasted long. Something was coming. Something that would test both of them again, in ways they couldn't yet imagine. That night was quieter than usual. The man sat near the small window, watching the moonlight slip through the curtain. The single mother sitting across from him could tell something was troubling him. He had been distant all day, speaking little, lost in his thoughts. She poured him a cup of tea and placed it beside him. "You haven't said much since morning," she said softly. "Something wrong?" He turned to her slowly, eyes thoughtful. "I was just thinking about everything that happened," he said. "About that night in the woods, and what I whispered." She nodded, remembering how strange his words had sounded back then. "I've been meaning to ask," she said carefully. "What did you mean when you said I saved us both?" He looked down, his hands trembling slightly as he held the cup. "That night," he began, his voice low, "I thought my life was over. They left me there to die. I could hear the dirt falling over me. And I stopped fighting. I told myself maybe it was easier to just let go." He paused, breathing deeply. "Then out of nowhere I heard your voice. You digging, calling out, trying to help someone you didn't even know. And in that moment something inside me came alive again." The woman felt a chill. "So you meant?" "I meant that you didn't just save my body," he said. "You saved whatever was left of me inside." The silence that followed was heavy yet peaceful in a way. She looked at him differently now, not as a stranger or a burden, but as someone who had been broken by life, just like her. He set the cup down and turned his gaze to her small son's bedroom door. "You have a good heart," he said quietly. "I can see where your boy gets it from." She smiled faintly. "I just did what anyone would do." He shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Most people would have walked away. You didn't." Over the next few days, something changed between them. They started to share more, but not just words, but moments. He helped her around the house, cooked breakfast, even fixed her old car that had been sitting unused for months. Her son followed him everywhere, laughing and asking questions. The small house, once filled only with the sound of chores and tired sighs, now echoed with laughter and conversation. But peace rarely stays for long. One evening, as the mother was closing the curtains, she noticed a car parked far down the dirt road near her house. It wasn't a car she recognized. Its headlights were off and someone was sitting inside. She froze, her heart beating fast. When she told him about it, he went quiet. "Are you sure?" he asked, his face turning pale. "I saw it," she whispered. "It's been there for a while." He stood up and looked out the small window, his jaw tightening. "They must have found out I'm alive," he said under his breath. "Who are they?" she asked nervously. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "People who want me gone, for good this time." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the wooden floor, every distant noise outside made her sit up, listening. He stayed awake too, sitting by the window with a flashlight in his hand, ready for anything. The next morning, when the sun came up, the car was gone, but the feeling of fear stayed. "We can't live like this," she said as she handed him a cup of coffee. "You can't keep hiding here forever. It's not safe, and not for you, not for my son." He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I need to end this. I need to expose them," she frowned. "How? You can't go to the police. You said they might be involved." He looked up, determination in his eyes. "We do it our way," he said. Quietly. Over the next few days, they made a plan. He still had a phone hidden in the woods near where she found him, something the kidnappers didn't know about. It contained messages, recordings, and details about the people who betrayed him. Together, they decided to retrieve it. That evening, after her son fell asleep, they drove to the edge of the forest. The road was empty and the air was thick with tension. She parked the car near the same place she'd found him buried. The memory hit her hard. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "We don't have a choice." They walked into the woods, flashlights cutting through the darkness. He led the way until they reached a tree marked with a deep scratch on the bark. He knelt and dug near the roots until his fingers touched something wrapped in plastic. He pulled out a small phone, dirt still clinging to it. "It's all here," he whispered. "Everything." Just as they turned to leave, the sound of branches breaking echoed behind them. She froze. A flashlight beam cut through the trees. "Someone's here," she whispered. He grabbed her hand. "Run." They ran through the woods, ducking behind trees, their hearts pounding. The footsteps followed, fast, heavy, getting closer. Suddenly, they reached the road, jumping into the car. She started the engine, tires spinning against the dirt, and sped away. Neither spoke until they were miles from the woods. He finally broke the silence. "They know," he said, his voice shaking. "But I got what we needed." That night back at the house, he connected the phone to her old laptop. Together, they watched video clips and listened to recorded calls, proof of the betrayal. There were voices, names, deals, and plans that would ruin lives if exposed. "This is enough to bring them down," she said, staring at the screen. He nodded. "Yes, but we have to be smart. We can't just hand it over." They decided to send the information anonymously, to journalists and people who couldn't be bought. It took them the entire night to prepare everything. By morning, it was done. The files were out in the world beyond anyone's control. When they finally rested, exhaustion hit them both. But in that tired silence, there was relief. He turned to her and said softly, "Whatever happens next, thank you. For standing by me when you didn't have to." She smiled faintly. "You'd do the same." He shook his head gently. "I'm not so sure," he said. "But you're different." "You believe in people." The next few days were tense. News began spreading online. Reports of arrests, financial crimes, and a scandal involving a large company. She knew he had finally been heard, but the fear still lingered. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the kitchen, she noticed him standing outside staring at the trees. He seemed lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled sadly. "How strange life is," he said. "A few weeks ago I thought I was done. Now I'm standing here breathing, watching sunlight. Because of you." She looked down, unsure how to respond. He stepped closer and said, "When I whispered that night, that you saved us both, I didn't just mean me. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that no matter how lost you are, someone's kindness can pull you back." Her eyes softened. "Maybe we both needed saving," she said quietly. He smiled at that. "Maybe we did." For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She realized that even though danger had come to her door, something beautiful had also come with it, a bond built not on wealth or status, but on trust and humanity. That night, as her son slept soundly, she sat by the window looking at the stars. He sat beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The world outside was still uncertain, but for that moment inside that small house, there was calm. The kind that comes when two broken souls finally understand they are no longer alone. And as the clock ticked quietly in the background, he whispered once more, almost to himself, "You saved me." She turned to him, smiled softly, and said, "No, we saved each other." Weeks passed after the night they sent the evidence out. The house slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The man stayed low, rarely leaving, while the mother focused on work and caring for her son. Still, there was something different in the air, something lighter, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. The news had started spreading everywhere. Big headlines appeared online and on TV about the corruption scandal. Several powerful people were arrested, including the man's former business partner. The public was shocked. The story became a symbol of justice, the rich finally facing consequences. But nowhere did it mention the woman who made it possible. Her name was never spoken. She preferred it that way. She didn't want attention. She only wanted peace. The man watched the news quietly from the corner of the room. When the police announced that the main people behind his kidnapping were now under arrest, his shoulders finally relaxed. He turned to her and said softly, "It's over." She nodded, though part of her didn't quite believe it. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "They can't hurt us anymore." That night, for the first time in a long while, they both slept without fear. No strange cars outside, no whispers in the dark, no tension between every heartbeat. Just calm silence and the soft sound of crickets from the woods. The next morning he made breakfast for her and her son. Pancakes, slightly burnt but filled with effort. She laughed as he tried to flip one and nearly dropped it on the floor. Her son giggled so hard he could barely breathe. For a moment it almost felt like family, a kind she hadn't known in years. But deep down, she knew this peace wouldn't last forever. He had a life waiting beyond this small home, a world of meetings, companies, and responsibilities. And she had hers, simple, humble, but built on hard work and quiet strength. A few days later, he received a letter from his lawyer. He had to leave the country for a while to testify in court. The news left the house quiet again. "When do you have to go?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "Soon," he said. "Maybe in a few days." Her son, sitting nearby, looked disappointed. "Will you come back?" he asked in his small voice. The man smiled gently. "Of course I will," he said. "I'll never forget you two." The night before his departure, they sat outside on the small wooden porch. The air was cool, and the stars spread across the sky like scattered silver dust. Neither of them said much at first. Finally, she broke the silence. "When I first found you in the woods, I thought I was just helping a stranger. I didn't know my life would change so much." He smiled faintly. "You gave me more than life," he said. "You gave me a second chance to become someone better." She looked at him. "Maybe that's what we were both meant to do. Help each other start over." He nodded slowly, staring at the night sky. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Don't ever forget that." The next morning he left quietly. He didn't take much with him, just a small bag and a folded note he left on her table. When she found it, she sat down slowly and read. The note said, "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you yet, but one day I will. Until then, please take care of yourself and your son. You reminded me that goodness still exists. That's something money can never buy." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She knew his handwriting, and the few drops of dried coffee on the paper made her smile. Life went back to normal. She went to work, took her son to school, and spent her evenings cleaning and cooking like before. But sometimes when she passed by the woods, she would stop and stare quietly. Remembering the night everything changed. Months turned into a year. The story of the corruption faded from the news, replaced by newer scandals. She didn't hear from him, and she didn't expect to. People like him lived in a different world. Then one ordinary morning, while she was washing dishes, a knock came at the door. When she opened it, no one was there. Only a small envelope sat on the porch. It was sealed with wax, elegant and neat. Her name was written on it in familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a short letter and a stack of papers. The letter read, "You once told me you wanted to give your son a better life, a place where he could dream bigger than this small town. I've set up something for you. A trust fund in your name and a new house. Nothing fancy, but safe, warm, and yours. It's not payment. It's gratitude, because you didn't just save me. You reminded me what it means to live with purpose. I owe you my peace, my hope, and my faith in people again. Thank you." She covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. She turned the papers over and saw official documents. Ownership papers for a small house in another town, near a good school with enough space for a garden her son always dreamed of. Her son walked in, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked. She knelt, hugging him tightly. "Nothing's wrong," she whispered through tears. "Everything's finally right." A few weeks later, they moved into the new home. It wasn't large, but it was beautiful in a simple way. There were trees outside, a small porch, and sunlight that filled every corner. Her son ran through the rooms laughing, while she stood by the window, holding the letter close to her heart. Sometimes, she thought about him, wondering where he was, if he was happy, if he ever found peace. She liked to believe he did. One late afternoon, while watering the plants in her new garden, she noticed a car slow down on the road nearby. The windows were tinted, and for a moment her heart skipped. But then through the glass she saw a familiar hand lift slightly, as if waving. She smiled. The car didn't stop, just kept moving down the road, disappearing into the distance. She didn't need to chase after it. That small gesture was enough. It said everything words couldn't. From that day on, she carried a calmness inside her that no hardship could take away. She had lived through fear, uncertainty, and loss, but in the end she found something far more valuable. faith in humanity.